All right, good morning. I'm Judith McConnell, Administrative Presiding Justice of the Court of Appeal, and I'm here to interview the chair of the Legacy Committee, Justice Judith Haller. We sit on the same court together. Justice Haller.
Good morning, and for everybody, I'm the other Judy on the court, since we have two Judys.
Yes, that's
right.
And
I'm going to say one thing. Thanks for mentioning my position as the chair. The other thing I should mention is that David Knight, our videographer, has, we've done over 120, and I think David has videographed all but one or two of those. And this is the last one he'll be videoing, because he is retiring in 2 weeks.
Don't make me cry.
No, don't make me cry.
Oh, because we've worked with David on many projects through Seizure and other things, and always been a pleasure to work with you, David.
Oh, ditto that.
And with you, Justice Haller, and
Thank
we've
you.
had a long time together, working together in the years of our service. But I want to start by asking you a little bit about your childhood and your background. You grew up in L.A.?
I did. I was born and raised in L.A. My dad's father immigrated from Slovakia in the early 1900s and ended up first in the melon fields of Imperial County, and then he started a wire business in Los Angeles, in downtown L.A. on Los Angeles Street. And then Mom's family came from England, and they first in New Hampshire, then LA. And I literally was in LA till I came kicking and screaming to San Diego when I married my high school boyfriend after college.
Well, that's right. And your father's business is still thriving, as I understand it.
It is. There's kind of a story to that. My grandfather's business was called Wire Products. And Dad had to quit high school to start helping his father in that business. And for reasons I've never been told, my dad, about 20 years later, started Precision Wire Products. And so Dad's business has been thriving, and my brother, when Dad died suddenly in 1974, took over the business, and it still operates in the City of Commerce and manufactures. Probably you have used my brother's shopping carts.
Shopping carts,
and
yes.
The cute story about that is my husband, John, was a patent attorney, and when my brother, also a John, there are many Johns in my family.
And your son as
and my
well.
son and grandson. And it goes on and on and on. So my brother was actually working for JPL because he has a PhD in astrophysics. So he was working for JPL on the Mars, one of the Mars projects. And then when Dad died, he took over the business and really renovated it and started making shopping carts as the main product. Dad's main product was making oven racks for O'Keefe and Merritt. So
oh, no kidding. That's so interesting.
That's that.
So good. Well, so you grew up in LA in a very successful business family. I think I met your mom at some point. She was very long-lived, wasn't she?
Yes, Mom. I tell you, Mom lived and she was almost 94. And when Dad died suddenly, she and my brother took over the business. And I always, Mom was the very quiet, subdued, but very strong person. And Dad was, if Dad was in the room, you'd know he was there, with great personality. But I'll often think that my mother could have come over on the Mayflower and she would have done very well, because she was quite disciplined.
She was very strong. I remember meeting her when you got the Joan Dempsey Klein Award, given by California Women Lawyers.
Judy, you have such a good memory. Yes. So, at any rate, I went to elementary school at 74th Street, then to Horace Mann for junior high, and then to Washington High School in L.A.
And Washington is where you met your husband, John.
Yes, John.
So I'm going to ask you, when I first came to the Court of Appeal, we had a wonderful clerk named Steve Kelly, and he said, you have to remember, Justice Haller is the prom queen. And I'd never heard that before, so I want you to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the irony of this is, yes, it was a homecoming event, and the guy that I was dating at the time was on the football team, and this little presentation was during halftime. So I needed an escort, so a friend introduced me to John and said, you know, she just needs an escort. This is going nowhere. Well, That was in, I was 16 years old at the time.
And how old was he?
Barely 17. So, any rate, John went off. When we graduated from high school, he went off to San Diego State and graduated 6 months before I did, because you had half terms back then. And then I went to UCLA, and then after I graduated from UCLA, we got married. I mean, I'm laughing about it because if you think about the fact that you're 16 and 17 when you meet, the likelihood that your interests will continue to go down the same path, but they did.
So interesting. And then he went to law school here in San Diego.
Yeah, John, I mentioned my brother being an astrophysicist, and my husband John he was one of the guys who had a slide rule all the time. Okay, so he was a real nerdy kind of guy, and with a great personality, and I say that very lovingly. But he was a physics major and an engineer, and then got a master's degree in physics. And his very first job was for a company here in San Diego, and he basically built computer programming and such early on for the U.S. Navy. And he decided, I don't really want to be an engineer anymore. So he went back and said, I think I'll go to law school. He went to law school at night. And
at USD.
At USD.
And you were already down here, living with him down here.
Yes.
And you were working at the San Diego State.
Yes. It turned out, after John and I got married, he had a chance to go back to school, and one of us needed to work. So I became an assistant to a very wonderful woman who was probably number 3 in the college administration at San Diego State, by the name of Marjorie Warmer. So I worked for her for 4 years and was very involved in all the student events. Her title was Dean of Student Activities, and it was during a very tumultuous time.
Was this in the late 60s?
It was in, I worked there 68 through 1972, which was a very tumultuous time on the college campuses.
I recall that quite well.
Yes. And I was there, talk about small world. I was there when there was a student demonstration, and many of our students were arrested. And I remember the first time I met, and I know Justice Epstein will not remember this, because I was this young person who had an assistant position and had nothing to do with the law. And he came down. He was legal counsel to the chancellor's office. And when our students were arrested, literally back in 1970, I think it was 71, the administration had no clue what was going to happen. So he came down to give legal advice, and that's when I said to myself, Judy, you've always wanted to go to law school. So why don't you, instead of, I'll give you this story in a minute, why don't you go to law school, because that would be a great thing, instead of a PhD in history, to become a college administrator, because it would be such a useful thing to have. So I go off to law school. So John was at nighttime, I was daytime, and then of course after you work that hard, you're not going to go back to work on a college campus. You want to be an attorney. So.
And you did.
I did.
And your husband, did he finish law school before you?
He did. I'll tell you a story about that, because I had started law school at Cal Western. I knew that it would not be a good idea for John and for the two of us to be at the same law school. So he was at USD and I was at Cal Western.
Because you were very competitive.
Well, I don't know about that, but at any rate, it just seemed that it would be good for our marriage if we weren't at the same school. So, any rate, John was very, very supportive of me going to law school, and I think he was way ahead of his time, because I can remember I had our first child when I was in law school, which, as you well know, was quite unusual.
Very unusual.
So there were.
How many women were there in your class?
I was going to say a handful, not more than 5. And the more pregnant I got, the more I stood out, literally and figuratively. Uh-huh. So I can remember I was so exhausted sitting in the bedroom at home with Jory, and I said, John, I just can't do this. I'm exhausted and I can't finish. And he said, oh, Judy, law school is so easy. Think about how hard physics is. I'll help get you through. You just hang in there. And I think about that and how, good grief, if I had not just powered through, and without that kind of boost, who knows what would have happened.
Oh,
So
yeah.
anyway,
It's so hard having a baby and full-time school. It's very difficult. And was she your first baby?
She was, and I'll put a bookend on it. So Jory was born first year, and then John and I thought, well, we'll have a second one, but we needed to time it with taking the bar. So I'll never forget that. Johnny was born. Let me back up and say, always, remember you always got bar results the Saturday before Thanksgiving weekend?
Yes.
Okay. So we were expecting bar results to come out, but something had happened. And so I went to the hospital, and I was so thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm having this baby, where are the results going to be? So anyway, Johnny was born on a Saturday, and I got the bar results on a Monday, and went to interview with the DA's office 3 days later. So,
well, that's just a wonderful story. And you went to work at the DA's. Can you tell us a little bit about going to work at the DA's office? Who interviewed you?
Well, this is an interesting story. So I was intent on getting to this interview because they only interviewed once a year, and I was not selected in the first grouping. They hired 3 people, and it would not be a surprise to know they were all men. And
what year was this?
This would have been 1975 in November-ish. And then I got a call back a few months later, and who do I end up being interviewed but by Dick Huffman. Now, people would not necessarily know this, but Dick was the number 3 person in the DA's office at that time. He interviewed me, and he and I have served on this court together for over 20 years. So, small world, small world.
Small world. And then both of you later on went to the Superior Court.
Right.
But I remember you were a DA. How many years were you a DA?
3 years, and I'll back up and say that I think there were maybe 5 women, 6 women in the office at the time. I can remember Laura Hummus and Barbara Gamer, and there were 2 or 3 others, but
I do remember you coming into my court when I was a brand new Muni court judge, and you came in for a prelim or something, and of course I was a brand new judge, and you must have been a brand new DA. Do you remember that?
Judy, I do, but you were so much nicer. I'll tell you my first experience. I mean, back then, now to get into law school and to get hired, you have to do so many more things. But I had my hands full with 2 little ones, etc. And so when I went to the DA's office, I had literally never worked for anybody. I had not been in anybody in the legal system. I had never been in court before. I didn't know any of the protocol. There was no mentoring when you got in. I was in this little cubicle of an office with a very nice fellow by the name of Paul, who kind of gave me some guidance of what to do. My first appearance for the DA's office was in Judge Cooney's department. And I didn't know you were supposed to check in, so I sat outside, and all of a sudden this bailiff walks out and puts me under arrest for contempt of court because
this was your first
my
court
first
appearance.
experience. So I thought, oh dear, this can only get better. And then it was a search and seizure issue with 2 defendants, a drug issue, and there were 2 old crusty defense attorneys there and Judge Cooney, and I was
also old and crusty,
and I was so new. You could smell the fear on my face. So anyway, I got through it. The guy got bound, or the 2 got bound over, and so you were very much a pleasure for me. And things only went up from there because they could not have gotten much worse than that.
Well, there were not that many women in the legal profession or on the bench. I remember I never was able to appear in front of a woman judge. There just weren't any. So how long did you spend in the DA's office?
I was there for 3 years. I very quickly was assigned, I was in prelims because they put you in prelims because if things don't go well, they can always...
You can't do too much damage.
Can't do too much damage. Then I was assigned to El Cajon for a year, and Bill Howitt was my mentor, or not my mentor, he was the supervising judge.
He was the supervising DA.
Thank you, Judy.
Right.
He was the supervising DA of that office. It was a small office, only 5 judges. It was a muni court out there. It was a wonderful experience because I did prelims, I did trials, I did everything. Also, though, my introduction to the office was a supervisor saying to me, you know, I really don't understand why you're here. I don't think women should be lawyers. If you conduct yourself like Laura Hamas, we may be okay, but that's about as good as it's going to get. So, at any rate, things got better. And then I was assigned back. The next place I went was to juvenile dependency. And that was quite a shock.
Up on Meadowlark.
Up on Meadowlark. I mean, juvenile is such a hard assignment.
So hard, especially when you have 2 babies.
Well, I was assigned to both dependency and to delinquency, and juvenile was always a very hard assignment because you had so many children where bad things had happened to them, or you had kids who were in trouble. But I mean, from a professional growth standpoint, it was a wonderful experience. And it was at a point in time when the DA's offices were becoming very aware of child abuse. And Judy, you'll remember that out at Children's Hospital there were doctors who were willing to testify that a spiral fracture on a 2-year-old is abuse. It's not a skiing accident. Mm-hmm. So that Dr. Chadwick, and there was an orthopedic doctor whose name I will think of who was critical in that. So anyway, but Dick Huffman, who then came out and said, okay, you know, Judy, we're going to put you in charge of the little dependency unit here and such. But I will tell you, husband John did not want to hear about those cases at all.
No, you couldn't talk about them.
You don't talk about them.
And in those days, the district attorney handled both dependency and delinquency.
Exactly.
They no longer do, but they certainly did then.
Absolutely.
And was Ed Miller the DA?
He was. He was the DA back then, but this was all very brand new at the time. Nothing like it is now.
And the advantage of the delinquency is you got to try felonies, but didn't have to do it in front of a jury.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I was there for about 6 months. I beg your pardon. I was there for about a year. Then I came back to the DA's office and did. I was assigned to issuing. And this is when the police officers every Monday, it was primarily Monday, would come in, give you all their cases, and myself and a fellow by the name of Roy Gunner, do you remember Roy? Mm-hmm. Were in an office that was probably 10 feet by 15 feet at the most, and all of the cops would come in and we'd make decisions in terms of what to file and what not to file. And I do remember vividly this one day. Remember when we had that horrible shooting, Brenda Spencer.
Yes,
and
she was 16, I think, at the time.
And Roy and I were in the office, and none of the police officers were coming in. No one. It was like we thought, what in the world's going on? And that was one of the first mass shootings ever. Yeah, it was
horrible. She killed the principal and the janitor who saved children's lives by their actions. So you were issuing at the DA's office, and then you went into private practice with the Higgs firm. Is that right? How did that happen?
Well, Judy, I should say how I ended up going to law school. I gave you the story of how I did that because I had really always wanted to go to law school even when I was very young. But as you know, when we went to college, quote, the girls became either teachers or nurses or social workers.
Or secretaries.
Yes. I had one friend out of everyone at UCLA who went on to professional school. And so
Weren't you summa cum laude or something like that at UCLA?
I was. I should tell you the story. I actually wanted to go to Occidental College. And when I applied, the high school I went to was not considered very academically strong. And so I applied at Occidental, and they said, I'm sorry, we don't think you'll make it. If you go to UCLA and do okay, if you go to UCLA and get a B average, call us up and let us know and we'll reconsider. So anyway, I loved UCLA. I all good things. So anyway, back to, I had always wanted to go to law school but didn't. I was going to be a teacher. was assigned to be a student teacher at a wonderful school right by UCLA at 6th grade. I thought, oh boy, I will be terrible. I just am not really liking this all that well. So I decided, okay, I'll get a master's in history and then I can teach at junior college level. So then I go off to San Diego State.
San Diego State.
And I think the best thing to do is to get this law degree. And then where do I end up?
The rest is history.
So, at any rate, so
Yeah.
I thought in the DA's office back then, you basically went in for 3 years and then you kind of made a decision. And am I going to stay and be a DA for the rest of my life professionally, or am I going to branch out into a civil background? So it turns out that Jerry Lewis, who was a very beloved judge, Muni Court, Superior Court, and on our Court of Appeal, knew that Higgs Fletcher was looking for somebody with trial experience. And back then, you know, if you were in a DA's office, you got lots of trial experience. So I applied at Higgs and was Higgs, Fletcher, and Mack. And historically, there were about 5 firms in town that were homebred. There was Higgs, Greg Carey, which is now DLA Piper, Loose Forward, which is now Denton's, Procopio, Hollywood and Harrison Hollywood.
At Hollywood and Rhodes.
Yes.
Yes.
So anyway, I went with Higgs, and again, the story is I think there were 3 women out of about, there were probably 50 people, 50 attorneys at Higgs at that time.
It was a big firm.
Mm-hmm.
And you were there for how many years?
11 years.
And what kind of work did you do when you were at
Well,
Higgs?
I was really, I ended up being very lucky because they needed someone with trial experience. So I ended up working for a partner there who, let's say, many people would have referred to Dan as not being overly supportive of women attorneys. But we ended up having a great relationship, and Dan did almost all insurance defense work. But he did very significant insurance defense work in terms of he loved to do interesting cases. He did a lot of he did admiralty work, which meant I got to do admiralty work. Mm-hmm. We were involved in one of the big clients was industrial indemnity. We were involved in the MGM fire litigation, so I did more depositions.
Was that in Las Vegas?
It was. It was that one of the first fires out there.
Horrible.
Oh, and it was one of the first mass torts as well.
Yes.
And then we got involved in the asbestos litigation early on. And so I had a real variety of cases. Also, it was at a time when many people, there were cases involving plaintiffs who were suing landlords for the criminal acts of third parties. And tragically, some of those plaintiffs were women who had been at apartment buildings that weren't sufficiently secured. And so oftentimes the insurance company would want me to be representing the landlords in those because, of course, the plaintiff was a female. But at any rate, I had, sometimes insurance defense practice is pretty mundane and rote, but this was not.
Not at all. And you had jury trials, many jury trials.
Let's put it this way. I probably had 10 to 12 jury trials, which actually was quite a few back then, because as you know, 96%, 98% of them settle. Mm-hmm. But one that it's very fond memory, excuse me, there was our case. Our firm had a lot of cases out in Imperial County, and I mentioned my grandfather, that was his first stop. So Dan Hadeen, my boss, comes to me one day and he says, there's this case that's been pending forever in Imperial County, and it's so hot out there, I really don't want to go try it. It's probably not going to go to court, but it had to do with a dispute between 2 farmers. One had a lettuce field and one had onions. And our client had somebody spray their lettuce field, I beg your pardon, spray their onion field with something because it was having a problem. And the claim was it went on to all
Blew
of the lettuce
over.
and
Yes.
ruined their lettuce. So Dan comes to me, it's the middle of August, it's hotter than heck, and he said, this case is set to go to trial on Monday, but it's never going to go, so don't worry about it. I had never seen the file. So the file by this time, because it had been pending for years, was about like, oh, I don't know, it was huge. So I go home thinking I better do something about this. And Monday I go to work and we get a call from the clerk there saying, oh, by the way, a court's opened up, be here tomorrow. So I go out there.
And you hadn't talked to any of the witnesses?
I had nothing. I knew nothing about this case other than what I had crammed for over the weekend. And there were 4 defense attorneys and the plaintiff's attorney. I go out, I called John and say, hey, you're going to be in charge of the kids for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, I don't know what it's going to be. Throw a suitcase together, went out there, and Pete Dean, who was with the McGinnis firm, said, well, I'll give you as much information as I can about the plaintiff's expert. So it was one of those things where I was up all night. We picked the jury. Love this part too. You go to there, when you're out in Imperial, you say, does anyone in the jury pool know any of the witnesses or the parties? And everybody raises their hand.
They knew everybody.
They know everybody.
Everybody knows everybody, and the lawyers.
Yes, everybody. So we pick a jury, we do my opening statement, the expert's the first one on the stand, and let's say things did not go well for the plaintiff's attorney on that. Case settled, and I was home at the end of the week. So, but I always have a soft spot in my heart for El Centro because of that.
Were you in that old courthouse
yes,
that has the...
that looked like it was the Scopes Monkey trial?
Yes, the high ceilings?
Yes.
Good.
And not very much air conditioning.
No air conditioning, but they had ceiling fans.
Yes,
as I
they
recall.
did. Judy, you have said yes.
Yes, well, yes, but and who was your judge? Do you recall?
Lenhart?
Oh yes.
Yes.
I think he just retired not too long ago.
So, at any rate.
Oh well, good.
So, anyway.
So, did you become a partner at the Higgs
I
firm?
did, and that's why I was going to say Dan was very supportive of me becoming a partner.
Were you the first woman to become a
No,
partner?
I was the second, and then there were many after that, and of course now the Higgs firm, I mean, they're doing so well, and there are so
Yes,
many prominent
exactly.
women attorneys there, and they
Yeah.
have proudly a very fine appellate
They
department
do.
at
Yes.
Higgs.
Yeah.
But, you know, of course I've had virtually no contact with them other than from afar.
Well, so what made you think about becoming a judge?
I'm not exactly sure, other than it, for reasons I really don't know or understand. It was always in the back of my mind. I thought, as an attorney, I always was looking for solutions as opposed to making problems and you know, I mean, my job was to get this done in the best way that I could, to look for solutions so we could get things resolved. And from the time I was a little child, I was always a joiner and was in various organizations. And so I was part of the county bar. I was on the board for that. And I was on a group called California, the San Diego Defense Lawyers, which was the civil group. And also there was a push, thanks to people like you and Lynn.
Push to get more women
yes,
on the bench.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I always think, you know, you and on the famous, well, I'm sure the famous sit-in at the Grant Grill with you and Lynn and
Elaine Alexander.
Okay, yes. So I was in your back wing on that, and so you always were encouraging people or women to become attorneys.
Absolutely,
and
no matter
judges.
who the governor was.
Yes, no matter who the governor was. And the time was right. I mean, the time was
So what
right.
year were you appointed?
1989.
Went on the Superior Court.
Went on the Superior Court with Duke Majan, and luckily he was looking for attorneys to become judges who had both criminal and civil background. So that worked.
That you were the perfect person
Well,
for that.
At least, you know, you just never know what the governor is going to be looking for.
So what was your first assignment? I think I was the assistant
I was,
DJ
yes,
when you
Judy,
came
yes,
on
I
board.
will. So this is where we collide again, and you gave me good experience on the bench.
Did you do civil law in motion?
Judy, you did. You assigned me first to El Cajon, and I was there for about 2 or 3 months. Then you put me into civil law in motion, which for people who...
Perfect choice, really. You were the perfect choice.
Well, you're nice, but I will tell the story. This was at a point in time when we didn't have enough courtrooms for judges, so we were using the San Diego Hotel. And my courtroom was in the San Diego Hotel, and literally we were in hotel rooms that had been converted into courtrooms. I mean, we were in rooms hotel people would have used.
Rooms, yes.
Well,
bedrooms, bathrooms,
yes,
ballrooms.
Yes. So initially I was in what was an old bedroom that had been converted. And so there I was. I still remember my first day appearing in what was called Department 35 Law in Motion. You'd have anywhere from 12 to 15 motions, morning calendar, and then there was an afternoon calendar. Just talk about throwing you into the fray, and it was the best thing. Yes, and it was also my experience. You know, I had done fine as a litigator and trial attorney, and it was only when I got into law in motion I thought, my goodness, I had no idea how important the paper, the motion work, the written work was as compared to what I did so much as an attorney.
And a lot of reading was required. Yes. And as I recall, back in those days, there were 2 civil law in motion judges. One did the morning, one did the afternoon.
Right.
And a team of lawyers who helped you out.
Yes. I mean, that was, it was like an epiphany that I thought, okay, it's really different being the judge making the decision as opposed to the attorney who's making the argument.
You don't realize how hard it is until you have to do it.
Right.
I mean, it's really a lot of hard work.
Well, and also you come to understand that your job as a judge is making decisions. Some of them are tiny, and some of them are life-changing, and you really have to make the decision. You can't, I can remember somebody giving me the good advice, Judy, you just got to make the decision because you can't go back to them. You start forgetting what the details are, and then the attorneys need to know what you're going to do.
They almost don't care which way you go as long as you make a decision.
So, and so Tom Lavoie was my partner in law in motion. And so I basically spent some time out in El Cajon, some time in law in motion. Then I had a backup assignment. Again, this was you. I had some really interesting criminal cases. I remember one in particular of 2 police officers who had been accused of rousting and kidnapping someone in downtown San Diego, and they were charged with assault and kidnapping. And so that was quite a high-profile case.
So how long were you in the hotel? I have a funny feeling you were in the courtroom where the ceiling collapsed.
Yes, I was in the courtroom where the ceiling collapsed. We were doing it was actually I think it was a burglary case.
I think you were in trial.
Yes, we were. And all of a sudden, the not asbestos, but the tiles started collapsing. So, but that part was, I have two funny stories there because I
just want to say something. As I recall, the place was full of asbestos, and you were not allowed to go back in.
That's correct. It was see, you have a good memory.
Everything had to be decontaminated before you could get anything out of there.
Yes. Yeah.
What was your other part?
Well, the other part was this was a huge ballroom. So we were smack dab in the middle on the dance floor was where we set up the court. And one day all these tiles started falling down. But, you know, the jurors were always flabbergasted when they came over to the hotel thinking, oh, you know, it won't be anything important. We were doing murder cases in there. We were doing child molest cases in there.
It was a tough time.
Yeah. But the bathroom that happened to be connected to this, quote, courtroom, I remember one day I was there and I realized the only thing between me and the public on the other side of this wall, because there was a big hole in the wall, was a piece of visqueen. So it was quite an experience. But you know, somehow you maintained a real level of dignity, even in those kind of circumstances. So, and as I recall, Judy, after the hotel kind of fell apart, somehow you were able to get the county to understand we needed some decent.
We did, and they rented a bank building, part of a bank building. We built courtrooms, temporary
Yes,
courtrooms.
which
over
was
there.
far more dignified.
Very. I remember some of the judges were pushing everything around in grocery carts,
Yes.
literally, because they didn't have a courtroom assigned to them. So, how long were you on the Superior Court, Judy?
Just a little over 5 years, and I'll tell you the other assignment you gave me, which was the best ever, was an independent calendar judge.
Well, yes, and that was my project.
I know it was.
And I wanted a very diverse group of judges with good backgrounds who could handle the management, and so you were obviously one of them.
Well, I had the right background, and I had great cases. I loved that assignment. We would start in the morning, and you'd have ex parte, and then you'd have either trials going or you'd have law in motion on Friday. And I had 2 cases that I will never forget. I had the case involving the little girl whose family sued, claiming that SDG&E's power lines with the emission of EMFs, electromagnetic fields things, had caused her cancer. And that, of course, got a lot of attention. And I can remember the defense was, no, it doesn't cause it. This isn't, their view was this was not reliable science. And in any event, whatever caused this little girl's cancer was a genetic issue, and so they had all sorts of very high-powered doctors in. If you didn't have 2 or 3 PhDs or medical degrees in that as an expert, you just kind of didn't make the cut.
We learned a lot.
Yes, we did learn a lot. And the good part of that story was the little girl was completely recovered by the time of the trial. But so that one was a big one. Then the other one was that horrible case involving the little girl who was kidnapped out of her bedroom.
Oh, yes.
And was horribly sexually assaulted, then brought back to her home. And when the next morning, the little girl, of course, was complaining profusely about pain and discomfort, and the father and mother take her to the Navy hospital. And of course, social workers are involved and doctors are involved because this was something terrible. And in inquiries of the father, he made comments about the fact that he can't imagine that he ever would have done that, but he does suffer from blackouts. To make a long story, and this is a 5-year case, it really was, went through dependency. The little girl was very, very close to rights being terminated. And we were then at a point where you could take her little nightgown, and we were much smarter about DNA, and the little girl had said for years that somebody came in and took me out of my bedroom. And so they did the DNA, and there was the proof that it was not Dad at all. And I mean, they were within, I don't know, 2 months of a 2-6 hearing and termination.
Termination.
Yes.
Terminate parental rights.
At any rate, there was then a huge civil lawsuit that followed that, and I had the civil lawsuit that was brought by the parents and it was against the agency, it was against the DA, we had a full panoply. So that was quite a case.
Well, so in those days we were doing delay reduction.
Yes.
So all of the old cases were divided up among the 9 new independent calendar judges. Mm-hmm. So you got all of the oldest cases out there and had to manage them in addition to getting new cases that were under delay reduction.
So to say there were so many pretrial motions in that and so many important legal issues because, of course, immunity by the social workers and the deputy district attorneys was big. So I set a day when we were going to hear 7 summary judgment motions by 7 different parties. And Herb Hoffman, who was on the court at that time, was assigned as a settlement judge. And he called me 2 or 3 days before. He said, "Do you know what you're going to do on the motions?" I said, "Yes, I do. I'm ready. Well, I'll hear them on Friday." He said, "Don't tell me what you're going to do." He said, I think we've got a settlement. If you're willing to delay decision-making for a week, I think we have a settlement, and the whole thing's settled.
Wow.
That's quite a story.
That is a great story.
And I have never told Herb or anybody
what way you were going to go.
Yeah.
And you're not going to tell me?
I know, definitely.
but-
by now, I'm not sure I could remember exactly accurately.
What
That was
was
26
interesting,
years ago.
Many of the names you mentioned in the DA's office all became judges
Yes.
later on,
Yes.
except for Roy Gunner. I don't think he became
He
a
didn't,
judge.
no, but
But yeah, so you've got a lot of family of colleagues on the bench here,
So-
including Dick Huffman.
yes, yeah, that goes way back.
So you were on the trial court doing both criminal and civil, and then the Court of Appeal
Opened
came
up.
along.
Right, that's because
Whose seat did you get?
I took Howard Weiner's.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, Howard was in the chambers I'm in, Howard was in. And his research attorney, Melanie, became my research attorney, and Melanie and I have been together since, not that I remember the date, August 9th of 1994.
Uh-huh.
And here's another tidbit. Howard's other research attorney was Bill Dado, and
Who
Bill
is-
Dado is now on our court. So Bill went into private practice, then went to the Superior Court, and now has been at our court for 5
What
years.
a small world.
But
So were you appointed to this court by Pete Wilson?
I was, and again, that was very much a timing issue. The position was opened, and I thought, gosh, these positions just never come open, so maybe you ought to put your name in for it, and I did. And then Pete Wilson made the appointment, and here I've been.
It was such an exciting day. I
Oh.
mentioned earlier that I remember the party at Rainwater's. Rainwater's no longer exists.
I know that.
But all of us in the bar were very happy and the bench were happy to see you elevated. For one thing, we'd only had one woman on this court, Pat Benke.
Yes.
So I'm sure she was happy to have you join her.
Yes, and Judy, I have to tell this part. So when Pat Benke was on our court, first woman. When I joined, I was the second. Then you came, and then came Cindy, then Joan, then Trish, and now Truck. So our court is now 6 women and 4 men.
That's right.
Yes.
As it should be.
Yes, there we go.
Oh, did I say that? Yes.
No, but I
And
mean,
so
it's just.
I'm going to ask you, you've been now on the Court of Appeal for quite a long time, and just let me back up a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt just for a moment.
So, Judy, over the years, you've been very active off the bench as well as on the bench, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about your important cases on the Court of Appeal. Well, maybe I should do that first. Let's talk about important cases. What would you consider your most important cases?
I knew you would ask me that question, and I'm not so sure that I can name them by name. I mean, there are some that stand out, and they're important for very different reasons. I mean, one of the ones I remember so vividly was, again, another horrible case out of dependency, where this child had been brought to the United States, and I won't go into the details because they're so
Awful.
grim,
Ugly.
and ugly. But the big question when she got into dependency was whether she should go through the dependency system because she had been brought in from Guatemala. And when I say brought in, I literally mean that. And so, fortunately, we get her out of the police officers learn what's going on and get her out of this horrible situation. But there was a huge jurisdictional issue as to whether she should be helped through the state dependency system or the federal system. And I learned so much and in that particular case that stands out. Now, that was very important to this child, and all in the annals of all cases probably didn't affect many people, but I remember that one. I remember the cases more by subject matter. Okay, so when I first arrived, it was 3 strikes was coming in, had just been implemented, and the issue is whether or not judges had the authority to strike a strike. So we had a lot of cases arising from that. Then we started getting into cases such as what's the meaning of the slap motions? And I won't, for attorneys, they know exactly what I'm talking about. I had many, many slap motions trying. That was a statutory scheme.
Strategic lawsuit against public participation.
And the intentions behind that were wonderful. It was basically to provide protection to people who were exercising their petitioning or free speech rights, to get out of lawsuits that were meant to derail.
Meant to shut them down.
Exactly. Yes. And that was the intent, but it grew into to something it had never intended to be. So many, many cases in SLAP.
Still,
because we've been working our way through that for a long time. Then we went through a period where what was the meaning of wrongful termination in violation of public policy? That was a big issue, and I remember having several cases in that area. And what did it mean in working on cases on jury instructions in terms of what had to be established in those types of cases, or discrimination cases, et cetera. Then we went into a period of arbitrability. What cases are going to, what has to go to arbitration and what doesn't? And I remember Cindy and I had so many cases in that area that she and I were asked to speak to.
I put you on a panel.
Yes, you did. You put Cindy and I on a panel to speak to the appellate judges. That was so interesting because up and down the state, all of us had very similar issues, and there was a big case pending in front of the Supreme Court. All of the Supreme Court justices were there. There are Cindy and I opining on arbitration cases and what we thought might be the result of Scanian. And you could see I think at least 4 or 5 of the Supreme Court justices were there, and they were not giving any clues whatsoever as to what was going to happen on that case. So we went through the arbitration period, and then we started into wage and hour cases, and I had several wage and hour cases involving like See's Candy and a Starbucks case. And now we are, for the last 4 or 5 years, some of the biggest issues have been all the changes the statutory changes with respect to crimes and new crimes and punishment.
Yes.
And
fines and fees.
Yes, and retroactivity.
Yes. Huge.
So I remember them more in terms of subject matter, and feel like I've touched each one of those areas. And
it's never boring, is it?
No. In fact, we won't talk about it other than say you and I were just on a panel on an area that was new and different. And about a month ago, Melanie and I worked on a case where I'd never even known of the statutory scheme that applies when a fire district decides that they are going to take their independent and want to be a part of a county fire system. So it's never boring.
Never boring, yes. I remember a case you and I were on where a woman was targeted by another person who wanted the home that she had bought, and you and I got into quite a vigorous disagreement with the man we were on the panel with.
Oh, Judy, yes.
And because he didn't see it as a viable lawsuit, as I recall, and you and I were so appalled, we took it over, and I believe you wrote the opinion in the case.
It was.
She was criminally prosecuted for harassment or
yes, and yes,
blackmail or whatever.
Yes, she had wanted to buy this woman's home. The woman was selling it to somebody else, and the person who didn't get it decided she'd start harassing her by sending horrible messages inviting men to go to her house for any number
on
of
Craigslist.
On Craigslist.
Advertising.
Yes. Anyway, we'll stop there.
But it was interesting because I do think that sometimes the woman's perspective can affect the outcome of the case. Normally, you wouldn't know who was deciding the case, but every now and then there's a factual pattern where maybe you have a little bit different take on the facts than somebody with a traditional male background. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think there are some cases where that perspective becomes extremely important in seeing subtleties that the other side may not see. I think what has always been amazing to me is how much agreement there is. I mean, we go through thousands of cases if you take the entire court system, and really how much agreement there is, because what it is our court does and what our responsibility is very defined. And
the standard of review.
Yes, the standard of review.
I don't think most trial judges appreciate how important that is.
There are two things. There are three things when I came here that, again, I had another epiphany. And the epiphany was, I knew what the standards of review were as a trial judge, but I didn't really understand them until I got to the Court of Appeal, and I thought, maybe it's a good thing I didn't know just how broad my power was, because if you try to stay a little bit on the straight and narrow, you don't get in trouble at abuse of discretion. But abuse of discretion is, the trial judges have a lot
of discretion. Especially on evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my other epiphany was just how quiet it is here compared to the trial courts. The work is wonderful, but it's completely different. I still, to this day, miss the buzz of the trial court, because it's our only time with lawyers is during oral argument.
That's right. And just for the sake of history, we should note that this recording is taking place just as the pandemic is ending, and just as we're starting to feel safe enough to gather together.
Yes.
But our oral argument for the last over a year, maybe 16 months, has been virtual, and next month we'll be back together as judges, which is I'm looking forward to.
And I'll mention one other thing that's very different. If you're a trial judge, you make the decision, you make the call. That's it. You don't have to get the input of anybody else. You make the call. Of course, on the appellate court, your thinking and your reasoning and what you do has to be clean enough and persuasive enough that you want two other people to agree with you, but it's not as if, it's just not you, and that's a very different responsibility. Oh, one last other difference. On the trial court, you're out there. If you're the hardest working judge in the world, the amount of work is such that you do your very best to make the call. And if you have 2 hours to spend on a summary judgment motion, that's a lot of time. Up here, I always say we have the luxury of time, but we have the responsibility of time too, because we're supposed to get it right.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. There was something in the paper the other day about how the Court of Appeal rendered their decision in 9 days, and I think the reporter doesn't understand how our court works.
Yes.
The opinion may have been filed 9 days after oral argument, but certainly not 9 days worth of work. I want to talk a little bit about your work outside the court itself. Part of the judicial system, but you've been very engaged in both professional activities and judicial activities, and the bar received huge honors for your work. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in ethics?
Yes, and that has been, I think, some of the things I'm most proud of.
And you are my guru, I want you to know.
Well, thank you.
And you probably know, because I'm always asking you questions.
Well, I hope I've not given you any bad advice. But at any rate, I was invited to join the California Judges Association Ethics Committee. And little did I know when
you were on the Superior Court at the time? Or the Court of
no,
Appeal?
I was on the Court of Appeal at the time. It was shortly after I arrived here. Little did I know, that's one of those things of saying, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I should do that. And little did I know that the purpose of that ethics committee was to take emergency telephone calls from judges who were on the bench who needed an answer and needed it now. Do I have to disqualify? Do I have to disclose? I have this problem. This has happened. What do I do about this? Now, you also had a sane period where someone would call and say, hi, I have a problem. What do you think? But there were days when you literally would get a call and you needed to help that judge out and give the best advice you could. So and back then, as is true now, I think the CJA Ethics Committee had an intake of about 300 to 350 calls per year. They're now up to they issue about 400 to 450 what they call informal responses over the years. So it is an extremely valuable service. And so that was very eye-opening because you become very familiar with the Code of Judicial Ethics, et cetera. So I served on that and became the vice chair and then the chair of that committee. And that, I think I was the chair in probably 2001-ish, 2-ish, sometime in that time period. And I remember an interesting issue occurred because one of the things that's made very clear to the judges is that they can call and that it is held to be confidential. And while I was the chair of that committee, there was a challenge to the confidentiality aspect, and the Judicial Council appointed counsel to represent the CJA in that. So that was an interesting sidelight. Then I think, Judy, thanks to you, you said, why don't you apply to become a special master? Because
I'm sorry I roped you into that, but you certainly have had a lot of experience now as a special master.
So those are formal proceedings. Just as a little bit of background, there's the Commission on Judicial Performance, which you, of course, were chair of and very involved in, but who takes care of disciplinary issues relative to judges. And those that cannot be resolved can go to a special hearing, and they have special masters.
Did you participate in the special educational program that was set up for special masters?
Judy, for the first one, they didn't do that.
No, we did that later on.
Correct. And then I participated in the educational program, which was extremely helpful because the special masters have to make findings of fact. There are 3 of you. You make findings of fact. You also say, based on those findings of fact, what, if any, of the alleged canons of ethics have or have not been violated. Sometimes that's very clear and sometimes it's not so clear. And you provide a very, very detailed report that then goes to the commission itself, setting forth what the allegations that have been made, have they been proven, what factual findings have we made, and given those factual findings, what what particular canons do we think have or have not been violated, and then what is the level of violation. It's akin to basically a misconduct, prejudicial misconduct, and willful misconduct. We do not opine on what the discipline should be, but we can weigh in on either mitigating or aggravating circumstances. So
you've had some real hot potato cases, as I recall, including a Court of Appeal justice who was removed for sexual harassment.
That's true. I've had 4, and the first one was a very sad story of a judge who was beloved on the Superior Court, but who had a drinking problem that was precipitated by a divorce situation. And he had several DUIs and just couldn't get a handle on it. Mm-hmm. So, and as I had mentioned at one point, people who come in to testify on his behalf, you had the DA, the probation officer, members of the court, appellate justices. So that
all the leadership of the bench and bar.
Yes, were there. So at any rate, that was a scenario where the Supreme Court gave this judge an opportunity to rehabilitate himself if he could, so that he did retire from the bench, but so he could sit on the assigned judges program, and unfortunately he just never was able to get to that point. Mm-hmm. The second one was a judge who, a Superior Court judge out of Inglewood in Los Angeles, who I think really would like to have been a Judge Judy.
Yes, he really wanted to be on TV.
Yes, he did, and so he was...
he had a radio interview where he talked about a pending case, as I recall.
Yes, he did, and he did many community outreach issues that were not in compliance with his requirements, ethical requirements to not talk about cases, etc. So that one resolved, and then the third one I had was a Superior Court judge who was up in Fresno area, and that was a very hard case because it was a well-respected judge who had quite an impressive background, who had come to the bench from very difficult circumstances and was highly respected, and basically just became overly enamored with his court clerk. And things went downhill
He
very
was
quickly.
removed from the
He was
bench,
removed from the
ultimately.
bench. And then the hardest one, and the really most difficult one, was the one with an appellate court justice, Justice Johnson, in Los Angeles.
And you had many justices testifying.
Yes, yes, we did. Many of the incidents all occurred in Los Angeles area, and that was a very difficult case. We went to Los Angeles, myself and 2 Superior Court judges.
You know, just to back up, in all of these cases, you were the presiding special master.
I
and there
was
were
in
two
3 of them.
In 3 of them, and then there were 2 Superior Court judges with you. Yes.
The first one, there were 2 appellate judges and a Superior Court judge, but the one where I was a special master, it was 2 Superior Court judges. And so the 3 of us lived in Los Angeles basically for a month and conducted that hearing, and it was very, very difficult, very emotional, involved. I think we had about 80 witnesses who testified. Some obviously were on the stand for quite some time, some for a short period. But the accusations involved members, employees and colleagues at the court, also involved women attorneys and a couple of Superior Court judges. So it was very difficult, and we wrote the report, and Melanie, my research attorney, and I wrote the initial draft, and it's very helpful for the commission to have detailed findings, which we made.
And credibility findings. Those are critical.
You make credibility findings as well. And, you know, sitting in judgment as someone who is a colleague at your level and who I did not know him well, but I certainly had met him, and also making credibility findings of justices who testified during the proceeding, making credibility finding of judicial assistants and research attorneys. It was very taxing and difficult, but probably really important.
Really, really important. Important for the bench, but also for the public. And frankly, I want to thank you for your willingness to take on that
I think
horrible duty, because I know that it's very hard to get special masters to agree to take those tough cases.
Well, I was going to say, there were many tough parts of that. One was the fact of, hi, how would you like to move to Los Angeles for the month?
Yes.
Secondly, were the number of people who were simply recused. I mean, the second district was completely out. Nobody in LA could participate.
Yeah.
And then there were also judges from other districts who couldn't participate because he had been very actively involved in judicial activities. And then just the nature of the case. So, at any rate, it was a very tough case, and it was handled very seriously, and by his attorneys and by the CJP and then by the commission and then
by the Supreme Court. Yeah. Well, that was a big case. In your lifetime, you've had a lot of other roles. Now you're chair of the Legacy Committee, but before that, it seems to me you chaired the 50th anniversary of the Courts of Appeal.
This is so fun. I'll tell you.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
All right. Again, this was your fault, Judy. No, no. I'll say the very first thing that I did that was I sat on a commission after I'd been a judge on this Court of Appeal for about a year. Dan Kramer suggested that I participate in that, and that was very eye-opening, and I had been on the bench for a year, and they were looking for diversity in terms of experience on the bench, so I was the newbie. But more importantly, the Courts of Appeal were constitutionally provided for in 1904, and the Chief Justice, who was Ron George at the time.
It was the 100th anniversary.
It was the 100th.
Sorry, I think I said 50th.
At any rate, so it was the 100th anniversary. And so Ron George wanted to do something celebratory. So he put together a committee to put together a celebration of the Courts of Appeal. So I don't know how I ended up as chair of that, but I did. And we did something that was both historical and important and fun. And we had a lovely celebration at the Biltmore Hotel.
We have a picture of that in our court.
We do. And we had various speakers, and then we had a very serious event the next day. But part of, and I'm looking at Dave, who's here videographing us, because he knows that his life changed because of that. In one of the last meetings, we said, you know what? We should keep all of this going, because Ron George wanted the community to understand what it is the courts of appeal do, because I think we're very misunderstood. People know trial courts and they know the Supreme Court or the state Supreme Courts, but they know very little about what we do. So this was to educate, etc. So at one of our last meetings, George Nicholson, who was the representative from the 3rd District, said, you know, we ought to do an oral history of the Court of Appeal judges. And everybody said, whoa, that's a good idea. So actually, Ron George liked it very much, and the next year, which was 2005, he put together this committee, which was called the Appellate Legacy Committee, and I was on that and became chair, and there was a representative from each one of the 6 districts, and we came up with this idea of, yes, doing oral histories like the one I'm doing right now.
Do you do the Supreme Court as well?
We do not. The Supreme Court does their own, and
I
they do long professional interviews that go on for hours and then are edited. We did not have that kind of, we did not have those kind of resources. So we decided the best thing to do was to have members of your own court interview you, do these videos. Dave did the first and he's doing the last, and all of them in between except 1 or 2.
And how many have there been so far?
About 122.
Wow, what a wonderful historical undertaking.
Well, and I'll tell one thing that was very interesting. When this started, everyone, you know, the internet did not exist. It existed, but not in the framework that it does now. And we were going to do these interviews, and we had all these discussions about the importance of what we were doing, and that we wanted them to be used historically, but we needed to protect them and use the, you know, do them in a library type of setting where you had to come in and ask for permission to review them. Well, that became so unrealistic that about 2 years later we said, what are we doing? No one's able to see these. So they're now, we have our own court website. It's beautifully, I think it's quite well done. But it's also, you can link to any one of these interviews on YouTube. So we've gone from an archival approach to here we are. And
make it accessible.
Yes.
And do you know how many hits you get on that website?
I don't. And that's one of the things we need to do is rejuvenate. I mean, I know that there is travel on it and people come and hit on it, because otherwise the site would be, you know, the court can't put up every site. So no, we're doing fine.
Well, I think it's great. And here you are finally getting interviewed. And I know it's been like pulling teeth to get some people interviewed, but Dave, it's been very busy in the last week or so getting
he sure
people
has.
interviewed. And the pandemic shut things down for a while, didn't it?
It did. I mean, yes, as with everything, we went into a mode of not doing anything for about 9 months, and then gratefully the Chief Justice and the administrative presiding judges of the district said, we need to get this back moving again. And we were able to do that.
We're so glad that you're doing that. I don't want to leave out another part of your work. I mean, you do so many things. It requires a lot of time. You're a member of what we call the CJEO, the California Judicial Ethics Opinions.
Very good.
And we set that up. We got the chief to set that up when I was on the CJP. Because we wanted formal opinions that could be cited in more official capacity rather than just the informal opinions of CJA. And now you're doing that. Can you tell us what that committee is and what your role has been on that?
Yes, I'm a member of that committee, and I've been on the committee for about 5 years.
It's a Supreme Court
It
committee.
is a Supreme Court appointed committee that is to tackle ethical issues that are more systemic than applying to an individual person. So we've written any number of formal opinions, and these are worked up like an appellate court opinion. And there are about 15 members. Ron Roby has been the chair since the beginning. And we issue opinions. People come to us, judges who have a problem and who would like us to write on an issue. We have suggestions that come to us from justices of saying, I think this is an important area, or a judge will say, I think this is important, or a supervising judge of a superior court, or they come from any number of different people, or from the CJP. They are serious. First thing is for the committee to decide, is this something that we ought to write on? Yes. If not, how do we?
You do also give informal
We
advice.
also give informal, because oftentimes people need an answer quickly. And obviously, if you're working through a committee and you have something that is going to have statewide implications, it's going to take you more than 3 days, 4 days, 5 days to get this turned around. But the committee has done some very important work. They've issued about 25 formal opinions, ranging from issues as to how you can deal with outside vendors to issues having to do with recently, and this is very important, during the pandemic, CJEO, not in a formal opinion because there was not time to do it, but in an informal, it's really not called, it's called an expedited opinion, put together a subcommittee and responded to the need of how and under what circumstances can judges participate in social justice.
Black Lives Matter, for example. Yes.
And recently we worked on an official opinion having to do with restrictions on judges in terms of what kind of advice having to do with legal matters can they give to friends and family.
That's a big issue.
It was a big issue.
Yes.
We're now, so we work on any number of different issues, and that has been rewarding and important work. And it is,
How does the committee actually hash out an opinion?
well, a subcommittee is appointed, and that subcommittee meets with the assistance of what I will call a research attorney that is appointed to CJEO, and we get all of our days, everybody says what they have to say. There's a chair of that subcommittee. Draft opinions are put together. Those are then circulated among the subcommittee and then circulated to the entire committee. And that sometimes is a very, obviously there are many bright people on these committees who have very strong sometimes points of view. Once we have
both trial and appellate judges.
Yes, and commissioners. So we have
good.
commissioners, trial judges, and appellate court judges. And we then, if there is a majority of the group who agree with it, it then goes out for public opinion.
Public comment.
Yes.
Yes.
And the public comment, typically, the public can comment it, but typically we get input from judges. And those have been, in some situations, very instrumental in revising, taking things out, putting things into the opinion, so they are much stronger and better opinions at the very end.
Yes, and it's very important for the judiciary that you do that work, I have to say.
Yeah.
I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my colleagues. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I haven't got notes here, Judy, I'm just going off the top of my head, but I know that you've been very active in Inns of Court, and you got a huge honor from the Ninth Circuit a few years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, but you'll.
Oh, never mind.
Yes, I have. That's the crying gene. Anyway, I will. Let me talk about the Inns of Court.
Yeah, tell us.
All right.
Now, what inn are you a member? Or
I am.
inns?
I am a member of the Enright Inn of Court, and that's named after a beloved federal court judge, Bill Enright.
Who just passed away
Yes.
not too long
Yes.
ago.
And Bill was very instrumental when Rehnquist was the one who wanted to start Inns of Court in the United States. And San Diego at one time had 5 inns. We now have 4 inns, and proudly one of the only appellate inns, but
In the country,
in the
yeah.
entire country. So I was invited to be part of the original group for the Enright Inn of Court and setting it up, and that was through my good friend. When I came onto the bench, I could keep one friend who was an attorney, and that was Jenny Nelson.
Oh, yes, she's wonderful.
So I served with Jenny and several others, and I've been in the Enright Inn for, 25 years. And I still serve on the Enright Inn. And I think most people know what Inns of Court are very quickly. They are to mentor young attorneys we have attorneys, we have judges, we have justices, we have attorneys who have 2 years experience and attorneys who have 30 years experience. And we meet 8 or 9 times a year, and we discuss various legal issues and have presentations, etc. So that's been very rewarding work. And yes, I was honored by the Ninth Circuit.
And what was the name of the award? It was
professionalism and
civility.
yes.
And you know, I can't think of a better person to receive that honor than you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Because even under stress, you are always a rock for all of us here at this court.
Well, see, at any rate, thank you.
Okay.
And then recently, it's probably been 5 or 6 years in the making, but it feels recent, several of our appellate specialists, and we have such a fabulous appellate bar here, who had been members of the Inns of Court in San Diego, said, you know, you all talk about trial stuff all the time, which is very important and good, and every now and then we talk about appellate issues. But several of our most enthusiastic appellate specialists got together and pulled off an appellate Inn of Court, and I think we're either maybe 2, but I know we're the only one west of the Mississippi.
It's just been fabulous.
And it has been fabulous.
Yes. Federal and state.
Yes.
Civil and criminal.
Yes, and we do the best. What's better than an appellate attorney who you get them together and they put on a program? I still, to this day, remember that program that they did on writs of supersedious, etc. Oh my gosh, it was the best thing ever, and we
who
learned
would think you could do an interesting and sometimes humorous program?
Yes, and they built it all around the James Bond theme. It was
Right.
it was great.
They do videos.
Yes. Oh, we do it
the
all.
programs are fabulous.
You know, they are fabulous.
Yeah.
So,
and I think all of us, many of our attorneys here at the court also participate, as I recall.
you know, that's the other thing on participation I do want to mention, because our attorneys here in San Diego and with your leadership, we've come, you know, over the years, you and I know how much the court has changed in any number of ways, but one of the biggest is when I started in 1994, once in a blue moon, you would have a self-represented litigant on appeal.
Now it's about a third of our cases.
On the civil, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that changes things dramatically, and we've all become very aware of how tough it is for self-represented litigants to maneuver through the procedure. So many of our attorneys in our court have been intimately involved in setting up self-help workshops. Our court developed a self-help manual. I sometimes say to attorneys, if you want to know how to do your first appeal, get the self-help manual.
Well, the manual for self-represented litigants got a statewide award.
As it should have.
One of our managing attorneys put that together, and our attorneys have always been very active in working to improve the resources for self-represented
Yes.
litigants.
And clearly, in the last 5 years, we've seen so much attention being given to self-represented litigants. And the other activity that I was on, again, I think this was at your urging, that I become part of the Commission on the Futures of the Court. I did that in 2016 and 2017. And there were any number of recommendations of how we need to assist and make the courts more available to everyone, but especially to self-represented litigants, to make sure they're getting the kind of assistance they need. And then one of the big things in that report had to do with the courts need to get up to date with technology.
Exactly.
And so we had any number of recommendations about using technology for court appearances, for arraignments, for law in motion, for trials, for depositions, whatever. And so all those recommendations were made, and then here comes the pandemic.
And then we were forced to
otherwise,
implement them.
yes.
And
They've been widely.
You probably know that our Court of Appeal is the first in the state to be completely electronic.
Yes. And
in
Judy,
its records.
oh my gosh, had we not done that, it would have been a nightmare.
And it has been a nightmare for courts who haven't been electronic. But it has been interesting to see the changes. What's the biggest change you've seen take place in the legal system over the years that you've been practicing as a lawyer and sitting as a judge?
Well, I think technology has been huge. Number two has been the expense associated with civil litigation. I think arbitration has many wonderful aspects to it, but because so many commercial disputes have been going to arbitration, a lot of our jurisprudence in that area has not been coming to the courts, and so that has been a change. The use of private judging has been a big change. That's all on the civil side. The lack of civility has been very problematic, I think.
And that's also more on the civil side,
Yes.
I think, than in the criminal arena.
Absolutely.
The criminal arena, they all know they're going to be up against those people again.
Right.
And they behave themselves.
They absolutely do.
Yes.
But on the criminal side, I've been here long enough that we've gone through this enormous change legally. When I arrived, the emphasis was on very stringent punishment. So we had 3 strikes, we had enhancements, we had longer sentences. And now we are in any number of initiative or changes statutorily that are taking a completely different look at punishment issues, incarceration issues, length of sentences. So that's why initially I was talking about we've gone through these phases, and one of the biggest phases lately has had to do with all the changes in the criminal law.
Well, when we started off, there was indeterminate sentencing.
Yes.
And then the determinate sentencing law
Yes.
came along.
You and I have been around a
long
time.
And you see the pendulum swing this way, and then it swings back, and now we're seeing it swinging back.
But for that I've seen, but also just seems like it's very tough to be an attorney now. What's demanded and expected, and things are hard and complicated and fast-paced, and I oftentimes think I love my job. The one thing, when John used to practice and I would say we'd come home from work and we would be chit-chatting, and I would be complaining about something, he'd say, "Judy, just get a break." Just,
Yeah.
get a life here.
Get a life.
Think about,
And
you
you
do
do.
not remember that discovery dispute I just went through, or that Markman hearing.
And you do gardening in
Yes.
your spare time, don't you?
Yes, that comes from Mom, because her view was good to get out, and she found it very therapeutic to weed. So I do a lot of things in the yard that are to beautify. I don't consider myself a gardener, but I am good at weeding and clipping and making things look pretty.
And don't you find that when you're doing that, you
Yeah.
completely
I do.
forget about all the burdens that you carry during your workday?
Well, I know you love sports, I love sports, so I'll take my transistor radio out there and I'll listen to a baseball game or a football game, or if you want something completely inane, and my apologies, I'll listen to a sports talk show. I mean, those people can talk about nothing.
Anything.
Yes.
Yes.
And I just kind of zone out for an hour or two, and there we go.
So, what have I forgotten to bring up? You've had such an interesting. Oh, I know what I've forgotten to bring up.
What?
You have now grandchildren,
Oh, Judy, thank
and
you.
they're a big part of your life too,
Oh
aren't
my
they?
goodness gracious, yes. I when Dave was setting up, and I have some pictures, I think the pictures I have here are all also old, because let's see, our oldest one is 13, and yes.
How did that happen?
I don't know,
Yeah.
but I'm really excited because he is very good at math, like his dad and his grandfather, so he's following suit on that and is in a coding school that he's very excited about. Then his brother, who for a long time, my grandson's name is Justice, and it was really hard for me to call him that, because I always thought I was talking about a title. And so he is 10, and he is a very creative. He and his brother couldn't be more different, but he's so funny. One time when he learned the Pledge of Allegiance, he said, "Oh, did you notice they mentioned me and Justice for All?"
That's so cute.
And then the youngest one is just turning 7, and she's graduating from first grade today, so she's
Oh,
very
my.
exciting. And she has gone from the period of Disney princesses to, I'm now informed she is a warrior, and don't let me be confused. So that's the youngest one.
That's
But no,
great.
and the kids, my son is a big data kid. When you hear about those guys, that's what my son does. And my daughter, who I think would have been a fabulous attorney, ended up working for Disney for about 20 years and now works for Warner. And I've been around her when she's been on conference calls, and I thought, wow, she's pretty amazing.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
So that's
Yeah,
it.
that's
Judy,
great.
thank you for doing
What if
this.
I left out? What more would you like to tell us about yourself? Because you've had such an interesting life and career.
Gosh, I feel like I compared to so many people who are on the appellate court and stories and things they've done, and I've listened to so many of the legacy interviews, I kind of think like, I just sort of plodded along and did stuff.
I don't think.
Well,
I'll
anyway.
tell you something. As chair of the Commission on Judicial Performance, we were so grateful for the hard work that you have done as a special master.
Thank you for
And
letting me do that.
it was huge, and it's so important.
Well, if I can get through this without crying, husband John.
He's been great for you, hasn't he? Yes. Yeah, and what a nice guy he is.
He is.
Yes.
Patent attorneys are special people.
Well, I know he's a collector of patented items.
Oh my goodness, Judy. Yes, I should talk about that. John and I, for fun, after the kids were out of the house, we did a lot of antique looking. And he was always in search of patent models, because all patent attorneys know that in the old days you had to make a model. So, the cotton gin, the Smithsonian has that model. But there are many other models. So you have a model, and a tag goes in when you come, and a tag is put on it when you leave, when you get the patent issued. So we were always in search of patent models. So we, over the years, bought about 30 of them. And we proudly, when John retired a few years ago, he brought them home, and we thought, the kids will want these or something. Oh no, they had, let's just say that was not their cup of tea.
They weren't interested in antiques.
But kindly, John and I have, quote, gifted them to the federal court, and they are displayed over there, which is very nice.
Which is wonderful, because that's where all the patent cases are heard.
Yes, so that has been nice.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Judy.
Well,
very
thank
much.
you, Judy. I'm so glad to be on the same court as you, and always have been.
So we've been here a long time.
We
and
have.
Thank you for paving the way.
Oh, well,
Here we
I'm
are.
just glad to see you're here.
Thanks, Jude.